So I'm talking about, I'd like to talk about site specificity, the problem of site specificity as a challenge, occasionally as a trap, and as a standard. And to my mind, after having gone through a year's worth of the Urban Humanities experiment in our inaugural year here at UCLA, looking at Tokyo and also Los Angeles. For me, the question of site specificity really doubles the original problem of urban humanities in the first place. And sometimes in problematic ways. The very notion of site specificity has a connection to a desire to get close to the object of our research. And that's a theme with a long history in many disciplines, including the notion of site specificity as a kind of total solution to problems, and a kind of fantasy, really, robustly critiqued in recent years. Dana touched on, of course, the Cold War formation of area studies, for example, in which it was related to ideas about cultural access and predicated on a kind of a model of translation, where language especially gave privileged and even transparent access, and presence at the site authorized all kinds of unreflective and pre-critical forms of knowledge production. Kind of desire for nearness against really some of the challenges of dealing with difference. And the field, the idea of the field as a kind of place of observation and intervention, always deployed in places like Asia and Africa. Somehow you never went to the field in France. And constantly then running a risk of becoming a kind of neo-colonial knowledge. John, I think, rightly raised the issue of these epistemological questions that I think are associated with this. So again, returning then to the problem of the site as really redoubling the issue of methodology in urban humanities, where the problem of urban humanities, as I understand it, demands a new synthesis of humanities knowledge with architecture and planning and design and the like, adequate to the complexity of the urban itself, our site. And so a real approach, and I'm speaking now after a year's worth of negotiating and arguing and struggling about these terms. A real approach to site specificity requires theory and it requires detailed looking. And first, via Adorno's injunction that we all do the labor of the concept. In our case, clearly a contentious negotiation, which is fun. But that an approach to the site that's based on naive positivism is not really a productive way forward. But maybe broader. The very possibility of making a kind of robust synthesis of all the sophisticated ways in which a university that a university possesses for looking into the urban, that place that an increasing majority of the Earth's population either live or are deeply connected to. I think John spoke to this, and I think Todd added very helpfully that these relations are dialectical. I'm of course punting right here, and I'm going to move immediately to stakes. In relation to the site, the stakes of urban humanities, with why are we doing what we're doing? And as I again understand it, the notion of an urban humanities is fundamentally connected to looking for I think the lived democratic possibilities of the city, of the urban, beyond a pure functionality. This is of course a small d democratic related deeply to issues of equality. Of course, not simply related to voting or other institutional processes, but about having a say in one's own life in society and the possibility of voice. And that these possibilities themselves exist in these unprogrammed spaces, in practices and uses, in moments for gathering and speech, instead of sheer circulation, consumption, and reproduction. And it's related to a real tension, I think, between use and intent, between inhabiting and functioning. And such stakes require a kind of fine-grained approach to locality to see what's going on. That is, it requires investigation, preparation, in our case, prior to heading off to Tokyo with our group of 23 graduate students and as well as ourselves. We engaged in a 6-month course of preparation, wrangling, and other struggles to hopefully to provide the kind of robust background that's required to have the requisite literacy to see the city. So again, this is also about the labor of the concept too. When we want to put together a kind of combination of forms of knowledge, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, that parallels the kind of potentials that exist in universities, even if we infrequently put those potentials together, thanks to many barriers and other forms of inertia. I think we're looking still to find a kind of structured knowledge, not non-disciplinary, not post-disciplinary, not a generic humanities, and not the kind of submarine form of non-disciplinary forms of interdisciplinary, where interdisciplinarity, where we fail to clear the kind of standards for robust knowledge across several disciplines all at once. And fundamentally, this question too, I think, comes back to the issue of a possible public role for universities, and one that's consonant with these stakes, and not just with the sort of managerial demand that the university go get a job or something. I can come back to that later. I think this is also bound to what Dana introduced, of course, this issue of investigating everyday life, which we began the year with my discovery that in architecture this is an excoriated term, and we had a vocabulary negotiation, and we drew on Lefebvre. Here, I guess I'd draw on Du Bois, who also covertly draws on Lefebvre. That where the everyday life is understood as what's left after all of the disciplinary slices are taken out of the social, and carved up. Not just as a kind of leftover or dregs, but really pointing to a notion of a whole that goes beyond these disciplinary limits. So it becomes a kind of challenge to that knowledge in the first place. And then urban humanities as an attempt to be more adequate to the content of this urban everyday life, especially in everyday life as a place of conflict and possibility, of repetition and change, one that's lived. And so we get to questions of the interactions of the built environment, history, law, regulation, questions of informal networks and movements and flows and small groups. And this everyday is fundamentally, I think, conceived of in urban environments or in relation to the urban. The networks, of course, go well beyond the city limits, as Yo's presentation a moment ago reminds us, TEPCO is, of course, Tokyo Electric Power Company. There's a reason those nuke stations are up there. There's a reason that area was already depopulated prior to the disaster. So the site-specific investigatory part of urban humanities then calls for us to pay attention to the subjects of our research. The ways that people live and experience cities, the ways the cities work, in a way that maximizes our understanding and appreciation, respect, and ability to facilitate the human aspects of cities. Again, where the stakes are high, we mostly live there. And we have consequences beyond our borders for everyone who doesn't live there. And not plan them away or create collateral damage. It too is part of, I think, a struggle against a kind of technological, rational heteronomy of means. So this doubles then back to, and I'm wrapping up here, doubles back to the site of our project itself. We find in the project in many ways reflects upon the urban humanities enterprise and its relationship to the university. So if we think again about democratic possibilities in the city, these questions return in our own institutions where the university's possibilities face challenges from a current wave of managerial pressures and demand for a suitable set of managerial measures for bureaucratic rationalizations, maybe even associated with the kind of weaponized knowledge production that is at the service of the state and strategic control. And even here, we have maybe one of the tensions involved in the project where between catalyzing the kinds of practices that many of those here today have been engaged in for a long time prior to the Mellon Grant, who've had long histories of interdisciplinary practice. The hope of the Mellon Grant, of course, to initiate projects that are not of a helicopter kind of form, showing up suddenly, but fundamentally based on a kind of top-down reading of the university situation. So it leaves us with a kind of question and tension that remains and I think has to remain within our relationship to the site of the university as the location for this possible interdisciplinary knowledge and for its degree of realization if we're to retain the possibility for an urban humanities practice enhanced by an imminently critical collaborative practice. So I'd end with an abiding question then, and that's how well does the practice of urban humanities live up to its promise in relationship to the site of the university itself? And as a related question, how well does the initiated project function to further and enhance this or similar forms of interdisciplinary innovation